Today we're with Michelle de Maria, the tax expert at Chetcuti Advocates, and we're going to be talking about tax planning, both for residents, people who are domiciled here, and citizenship schemes. There are a variety of schemes in Malta. Some are linked to residency and some are linked to citizenship. Do they actually have tax implications?
Well, citizenship per se doesn't have tax implications in Malta. The connecting factors for tax purposes are residence and domicile. So whether you're a Maltese citizen or otherwise is not relevant if you don't also have residence and domicile, or one of the two.
Okay, the law doesn't actually give a clear definition of residence. Do you actually need to be in Malta all the time to qualify as a resident?
No, not really. As you correctly say, the law doesn't give a clear definition. In fact, what the law says is that a resident in Malta is someone who resides there, which isn't very helpful. There is a definition of a temporary resident, however, and that kind of gives us an idea of what a resident is not. So a temporary resident is someone who is in Malta for a temporary purpose, without an intention to reside here, to take up residence here, and who has not been in Malta for more than 183 days in a calendar year. So from that we can sort of pull out the principles which even our revenue use when trying to determine whether an individual is resident or not. And that is a physical presence of 183 days or an intention to reside. So it's those two factors which you would look at to determine residence. Now obviously a physical stay of 183 days is a lot easier to prove, and it's a lot more tangible than an intention.
Quite quantitative, so yes.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that there's a difference between residence and domicile. Can you explain to me what the difference is?
Domicile is a legal concept which is actually quite confusing, especially for non-common law jurisdictions where they use the term residence and domicile interchangeably. Domicile for us, especially in the context of taxation, incidentally we've taken that concept from the UK concept of domicile, is something more permanent than just residence. It is where you have your permanent home, where your roots are, so to speak.
So if you want to get tax benefits, enjoy the very efficient schemes that Malta has, do you actually need to be both resident and domiciled in Malta?
When you're resident and domiciled in Malta, you would be taxed on a worldwide basis.
Meaning?
And that means that you are taxed in Malta on any income or capital gain that you earn, regardless of where it is earned, and regardless of whether it's brought into Malta or not. So if you are Malta resident and domiciled, any employment income, any dividends, investment income, capital gains from disposal of removable property would be taxable in Malta.
But doesn't that have implications then that you might also be taxed on it in your other, where
Absolutely.
you are actually earning this income?
Absolutely. You would be entitled to a credit for any tax you have suffered overseas, but the foreign source income or capital gains would still be caught within the Malta net.
So I understand that Malta has quite a network of double taxation agreements. Does that help as well?
Well, yes, and there are about 70 double tax treaties. What a tax treaty does is it allocates taxing rights between jurisdictions. So it would give a guidance and say in certain situations, this is the jurisdiction which is entitled to tax. Malta, on the other hand, if tax has been suffered in another jurisdiction, has the obligation to grant a credit, to grant relief, to ensure that the same income isn't taxed twice. But for reporting purposes, you need to include all your foreign and local source income and capital gains in your Malta tax return. How the actual tax calculation works out depends then on whether there has been foreign tax or not.
Explain to me a little bit about the different schemes there are for residences. What happens if you're not domiciled, for example?
Okay, if you're not domiciled in Malta, you would be taxed on a more restricted basis. We said that if you're resident and domiciled, then you're taxed on a worldwide basis. Once the domicile element is not present, you are taxed on what we call a source and remittance basis of taxation. That means that you are taxed in Malta on any source income or capital gains. So if you have employment in Malta, you would be taxed on that employment income. If you have a property in Malta and you sell it, you would be taxed on any gain. You would also be taxed on any foreign source income which you remit to Malta. Foreign source capital gains, however, are not taxed even if they are remitted. What does remittance mean? We're often asked this question. Remittance is taken in quite a broad sense. It could be a simple transfer of funds from one bank account to another. So suddenly you have foreign source funds sitting in your Malta bank account. But it also refers to spending of foreign source income in Malta. So if you use a credit card or if you use a bank card and you're using foreign source income in Malta, that is also considered to be a remittance. And if that remittance is income, then you would be taxed on that in Malta.
It sounds extremely complicated, so I presume that this is where a company like Chetcuti would be able to help. What's the sort of structure that you would look at when you're talking to a new client?
We would look, although we call it sort of tax planning, we look beyond the tax. We would look at the client's affairs, his lifestyle, where does he get the funds that he uses to live, how is he going to continue to access those funds with a minimum tax impact.
Presumably there's things that you would need to structure before they actually come to Malta. That would make a difference?
Yes. Ideally, because of the remittance basis of taxation and because remitted income is taxed and remitted capital is not, then you would try and structure your affairs in such a way that as far as possible you would remit capital. Or as far as possible you would remit, for example, income that has already been taxed overseas. This isn't avoiding tax, this is mitigating the tax impact in a way which is in accordance with our law, and which, if you've suffered tax in another jurisdiction on that income, then it's perfectly legitimate to want to not pay tax again.
I understand that Malta offers an individual investor program, which is basically a citizenship by investment. Now, one of the first things you said was that if you are Maltese, then you obviously would have the same tax as any other Maltese. But what are the implications for somebody taking up citizenship in Malta? Why would they do it?
Just a slight correction. If you are Maltese and therefore hold a Maltese passport, that wouldn't of itself trigger tax implications. So the passport of itself, without you also being present in Malta as a resident, wouldn't trigger tax implications. If you hold a Malta passport and you choose to continue to be resident in Malta, then you would be taxed on the remittance basis of taxation that we've just discussed. So therefore on any income you remit, foreign source income which you remit, or any local income or local capital gains.
Are there any other tax schemes which are interesting to Malta? I mean, once people come here and they want to set up business, are there also corporate tax implications?
There are, and this is part of the planning that we do. As a general rule, the more tax jurisdictions you have contact with, the more exposure you have either to double taxation or to tax leakages. So we would try, prior to an individual taking up residence in Malta and including the individual investor program applicants, to have a look at their structures to ensure that they are the most tax efficient they could possibly be. There are tax benefits at a corporate level, and those will obviously change depending on whether the individual is going to be physically resident in Malta or not.
Clearly there are a lot more technicalities that are beyond the scope of a podcast like this, but Chetcuti do have a number of publications, and obviously they've got people on hand who would be able to help you with any queries. So for the moment, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.